Good morning. Thank you very much for your kind invitation and for your patience in waiting with me while we saw whether the government would return to work in time for me to be with you today. I'm especially pleased that it did and that I can because I feel very much at home in this audience, with this audience. Skidmore just missed being a New England college by a few miles west of the border, but in many ways, except that geographic quirk, I feel like I'm among friends. And I hope you still feel that way when I finish my remarks. I am brand new in this role at the Department of Education and clearly could not have picked a more pivotal moment in higher education to take on these responsibilities. Excuse me. My own personal mission in this role, beyond the responsibilities, or complementing the department's responsibilities, are to merge my own experiences as an advocate for students and for justice, as past president of a liberal arts college, and as a government lawyer in the Clinton administration tasked with deregulation. Really, there are such people, tasked with deregulation, and to put all of that together to advance the president's initiative and to help all of us achieve the goals of education opportunity that bring us here today and to our careers in this work. Thank you very much. I don't have to tell any of you that a college degree is the best investment that people can make in their futures, in our nation's opportunity, whether you look at it as a source of economic growth and prosperity or a pathway to civic engagement, responsibility, and personal health and opportunity. We are all counting on higher education succeeding. The President, Secretary Duncan, Undersecretary Cantor, and I share your commitment to that dream and hope to work together with you to increase the value and opportunity that we get from higher education. To put it very bluntly, I'm from the government, we need your help, and we're here to listen. You know that despite historic investments and reforms, attending college has never been more expensive, and that cost scares off too many people who could benefit from learning at one of our schools. The too many students who are Pell eligible or first-generation students can't get beyond sticker price or the fear of borrowing. And that debt that many of them do incur is burdening people who want to start families, who want to launch a business, buy a home, save for retirement, or otherwise plan lives that are not in the shadow of the enormous debt that they and our country collectively are building. And so the President has put forward an ambitious new agenda to make college more affordable for American families. He wants to do nothing less than solve the problem of college affordability and student debt. We believe that this will resonate with the efforts that you're undertaking and that together we can create constructive synergies that will do both at the same time. His plan, outlined first in a speech on August 22nd at the University at Buffalo, would be to move on three fronts: to encourage innovation and constructive competition in higher education to improve institutional performance, to make family debt more manageable, and to empower students and families when they make the choice of where they're going to go for college or post-secondary programs, to choose institutions that provide the best value for their hard-earned money and their precious time in this pursuit. Let me tell you a little bit about the rating system and then circle back to the innovation notion. As you may know, the President has charged the Department of Education with designing a college rating system by the start of the 2015 academic year. This new consumer tool is designed to give people some critical information about value. In the future, the refined version, the 2.0 or 3.0 of that system, will be used, if we are successful, to transform how federal student aid is awarded. Taxpayer dollars will be steered toward high-performing institutions that demonstrate commitment and success in providing a good education and solid value. So let's look for a moment at the how and the why of the rating system. Why? The Department of Education currently provides over $150 billion each year in student financial aid to help students afford and complete post-secondary education. Almost all of these resources are allocated based on enrollment, based on headcount, not on student outcomes, which can be as diverse as degree attainment, employment, ability to repay loans, voting record, employment in the public sector, you name it. As a result, institutions have a strong incentive to enroll students, but not necessarily through these incentives to improve student outcomes or enroll students who might be the most difficult to educate. You may have institutional incentives or community and state incentives to do that. In fact, I know you do, but the federal system is not designed to move in that direction. The administration's plan then is to rate institutions and connect student aid to performance and outcomes based on the premise that these measures will better drive value and result in more affordable education for all students. Students now can use that federal aid, that $150 billion worth of money, at over 7,000 accredited institutions, from liberal arts colleges and community colleges to research universities and online programs. Although choosing a college is one of the most challenging and expensive decisions that families make, and there are many different sources of information, there's still a shortage of information to help people balance what they put in, what taxpayers put in, and what they're likely to get from a program. The Obama administration has done a lot to try to be helpful in that regard, and we are still fine-tuning many of these tools and would appreciate your help on them as well. We have a program called Know Before They Owe, including the financial aid shopping sheet and the college scorecard. This new rating system would take that work even further, with the idea that we would provide accurate, accessible information that would allow students and families to compare and choose colleges. We also hope, as a result of this, that the taxpayer investment would yield higher returns. I speak that way because we're in the Fed building, that the taxpayers would also receive a better return on their substantial investment in education to accomplish the broad social goals that drive those investments. So by increasing consumer choice, we are thinking that that would create a further energy for the loop that would drive schools and make it attractive to increase performance, reduce costs, and invest in student success and access at the same time. The measures that we'll be using, which I have to admit are constrained by the data currently available to the federal government, are based on the three different elements. Access, so for example, the number of students at an institution receiving Pell Grants. Affordability, such as some measure to be developed of average tuition, scholarships, and loan debt. And outcome measures, like graduation and transfer rates, graduate earnings, continuation to advanced degrees after college graduation. These ratings would be published on the college scorecard and be made available on the department's College Affordability and Transparency Center before the start of the 2015 school year. We're aiming for the January after this one. Over the next 4 years, we would then work to refine those measures in collaboration with you and students and families, and give colleges an opportunity to improve their performance and ratings. This is one situation in which, as people talked about, but you don't want places to be able to game the ratings. It was pointed out to me that if you have ratings that have real meaning, then while human imagination is great, that behavior that moves in the direction of increasing an institution's rating would be fine if you're measuring the right things. If you're measuring completion by students who come with educational challenges or low-income students, if you are measuring the ability of students who complete the program to repay their loans, then it's not gaming the system, it's improving the education to improve the ratings, and that would be just fine. My appearance here today is part of an extensive outreach program about this system that we're doing across the country. So, for example, Undersecretary Cantor is at ASCU, the Association of State Colleges and Universities, today in Los Angeles. We launched this campaign by meeting first with student organizations, and I'm happy to report, I'm sure some of them were your graduates, that the leadership of student associations and advocacy groups in Washington is extremely talented, very creative, excellent researchers, and by every metric that I would use for successful college graduates, they were doing beautifully. And it made sense for us to talk with students first and to begin to reach out to them and their families as part of this conversation. We also are talking to higher education leaders, folks like you, and also to faculty, to state education leaders, business and philanthropy, higher education associations, and consumer interest groups and other public advocacy organizations. We plan to talk to anyone who can help us design an effective system that feels sensible to you and sensible to the students and families who we expect to use it. We're arranging open forums, town hall meetings, and roundtables across the country. I'll be meeting with ACOM on Wednesday, and we have open forums set up in Baton Rouge, Northern Iowa, and Los Angeles, as well as Northern Virginia, to try to invite everyone, even if they're not in one of these structured groups, to participate with us. And we're going to create as lively an electronic exchange as we can. So there'll be places for people to submit comments electronically and to blog and react to each other's thoughts on this subject. And we will release a request for information, a formal document, in the Federal Register this fall to ask technical and subject matter experts to help us weigh in on the very precise issues, the details in which lie the devil, on measures, data sources, formulas for calculating the ratings. We will use that feedback to develop a proposed rating system, and we will share that with all of you in the Federal Register and in a broad set of conversations so that you can help us go from test version, sample version, to the working version, and help us at each step as we build it along the way. We've already got some generous offers, for example, from the AAU organization to convene their institutional researchers to help us do that. We have data jams in mind to actually test the rating systems and see if they work in practice and how they present institutions. But I want to be very clear that this is still a work in progress. There's not a there that I have in mind that I am not telling you about. This is a collective effort to come up with something that does the job and doesn't do things that would be corrosive to the educational mission. A few answers to questions that people have already been asking us. This is a ratings system and not a ranking. We are not interested in minute differentiations among institutions. Wheaton and Connecticut will have to decide how they compare in some other forum, not through this rating system. We're thinking much more in terms of broad bands or very wide categories of qualitative ratings that would let families, green, yellow, red, high value, medium, low, 3 or 4 categories might be what it looks like, but we need to hear from you and we need to work this out and see how we can be informative to people. I mentioned the critical importance of access and success. Success at graduating Pell-eligible students with a real education who find work and can repay their loans is certainly a central component of this system. So we want to do everything we can to reward that or find better measures, if there are better measures than those specific Pell numbers, to achieve that objective. We will not let something go forward until we have solved the problems of how to keep a rating system from moving in the wrong direction. We wouldn't want to do anything that deterred institutions from accepting students who might pose challenges or require resources to help them succeed in education. And we don't want to create any perverse incentives in this process. We also don't want institutions to pump their numbers with people in these categories in order to balance the equation in some other way. Again, your guidance, your thoughts will be extremely helpful about how these can be used and how they could be abused. There's an analogy that I think of when I am talking about this to the notion of competitive diving. In diving, there's the idea of degree of difficulty. If you do a very difficult dive, even if you do it not quite as well as the people who do an easy one, you get credit for it in the diving ratings system. That's what we're trying to do here in education, is making sure that the institutions that take on a higher degree of difficulty in their educational challenge are rewarded for that when we balance that with the level of performance. We would welcome your help in pointing us to ways of understanding these measures of value and affordability that you think are effective. And we're going to look broadly at other kinds of measures that may do the same. So obviously we will look at the existing ways of understanding college effectiveness. We'll look at NICU's college rating system, and Washington Monthly has one that does that takes on the task of including civic outcomes and public service, which is something that many of us want to be sure we help people understand and don't lose sight of. But we'll also look at things like the LEED certification process and consumer reports as other ways to get basic, clear information on a multivariate basis that might help us with this complex project. We've had a number of reactions ever since the President's speech on August 22nd. One that I particularly like called those initiatives bold, timely, and necessary. It happens that he came from somebody in New England. I didn't realize that he would be pictured, in fact, just before I gave my remarks. Paula Black went on to say that higher education needs to be fearless and wise about questioning long-held assumptions. And then he said something very near and dear to my heart, and thinking more about outputs than prescribing what we think might lead to student success. As a former president, I know how hard it can be to challenge long-held verities. But as an advocate for students and the public good, I know that we have no other choice. So let me come back for a moment to this notion of innovation and constructive innovation in higher education. I'm very eager to hear what you're talking about today, and some of this may anticipate some of the sessions that I'm planning to stay for as long as I can, because I think you have gathered people for the conversation that we want to be part of. Academia has started, but only relatively recently, to think about outcomes and to ask fundamental questions in that area. In 1999, when we brought the very first assessment coordinator to Skidmore, I don't think I have to tell many of you what the facial expressions on much of the faculty were like. 1999 is just a few moments away in academic recorded history. When we stop measuring seat time and credit hours and concentrate on understanding learning results and how to promote completion that reflects meaningful standards, we will all be better off, and we will all be able to do many of the tasks, answer many of the questions that we have in a much clearer way. As I was reading the Davis Foundation summary of the comments that they received, the phrase teaching load jumped out to me for the first time. I had never heard it with the emphasis on load. And somehow that seems like something that I would not mind leaving behind. Concentrating on teaching opportunities or learning experiences rather than teaching loads might be a helpful direction. Last night at the event that Will mentioned, somebody asked what trustees could do in this regard, and I know there were more trustees at the dinner last night than there are here now, so you can pass this along to them if you like it. Every time a proposal comes before the Board of Trustees, if trustees said, how will that investment contribute to student learning? How will we know if it actually does? And is there another way we could get the same result? And I would invite them to say that would be less expensive in the long run for the students in the institution. If we could all repeat that as a mantra, we might interrogate some of our choices a little bit differently. There's a lot of innovation going on There's a temptation to concentrate on the technology-based innovations. I like to start with some that are not. When I was a dean at a fine New England law school, I supervised career services. And I've always believed that if we can do better in connecting advising and career services, then we can help people make better choices that integrate their academic decisions, thoughtful ones, long-term ones, not major in business because there are jobs in business, but major in something that will help you be a problem solver or have value or bring out your best passions. That kind of work on campus can lead to more stable employment, ability to attach to the workforce consistently through times of change and cycles of innovation in whatever field the person enters, loan repayment, and therefore cycle back to those magical rankings. We all know about the conversations about flipped classrooms and blended learning approaches that may help us reap the harvest of technology. But I'm not one who believes in the MOOC mystique. I think after round one, we're starting to see that there are limits. This is not a magic bullet. But if MOOCs are doing anything for us, they are making us ask the question of them that I think we want to be asking on our own campuses, which is, what are people learning? What were they expecting to learn? Have they learned it collectively and individually? And what have I learned from offering the program this way that would help me cycle back and improve it for other students, for other administrations of this course? I'm excited about diagnostic tools that can individualize learning in the same way. And I remember back to an article in the New York Times, was at least a year ago now, about 3 young women from Texas who started college but did not persist. I didn't know whether to weep when I read it or jump out of my chair and fly to Emory in Atlanta to help them. But what I remember thinking was that they were so close. The schools that these young women went to had found women of talent, they had brought them to the campus, and yet they hadn't found ways to connect them. Some of those were academic, some of those were information, but there are now student services programs using the lessons of Cass Sunstein's book, Nudge, to help people think about what will affect behavior in the most constructive ways, how we can cross-generational differences in information flow to make people understand what their academic responsibilities are, to know, for faculty to know when they're losing people and why, and what they can do to bring campus resources to bear to help those people continue. Every morning I get a wide variety, as you probably do, of summaries of the day's news from different academic sources. And this morning there was one that highlighted some colleges where faculty are moving into residence halls because they believe that that will have retention results. And they range from Baylor to Boston. So I think we'll have some experiments about some of the very high-touch, very personal ways that institutions can make these improvements. How can we draw the best from the dedicated humans that we have present, the dedicated humans prepared to educate technologically, and put the best of those together? Let me close with one more set of innovations that we at the department are responsible for. I've said a lot about what you can do. Let me tell you what we know we need to do. We need to reduce the burden of regulation on institutions, but we need your help to be able to do that as well. We have to ask the right questions and focus on high-risk institutions and understand where those risks lie so we can do it wisely. When we wear our hats as taxpayers and citizens, we know that $150 billion is an enormous investment and we want to use it wisely. Some of the ways that you can help us are to insist on rigor in accreditation. Accreditation is a peer process. I've recently ended a term as chair of NSEKI, and I can see how much we count on all of you and the faculty volunteers who make that system work to be rigorous enough to feel confidence that we have set the floor at a reasonable level, that we are not tolerating substandard programs as places for students to go, reassured by the notion that they are accredited, and by the notion that they can use federal student aid at those programs. The more we can do to have a floor that we can feel confident in, the less we have to regulate to find problem institutions. So the one-size-fits-all is often a criticism of regulators, but if institutions tell us we're all alike and you have to treat us all the same, then we have no choice but to have one size and to have that be a pretty careful size that will find problems. The more you are willing to help us understand distinctions among institutions, the better able we are to lighten up on the ones who have a good track record or have demonstrated in other ways that you can be trusted with federal resources and the education of our students. That's a longer conversation. You'll hear more about it as time goes on. But I would ask you to think about those kinds of notions in your education associations and as you think about the part that you can play in helping us assure effective educational standards so that we can regulate sensibly for a universe of schools that are all competent. In his August announcement, the president said one more thing. He said he wants to shake the trees all across the country for great ideas, for some of the best ideas for keeping college costs down. We all know one thing for sure. There are many great minds in New England and many great sources of information to help us do that. And I'm counting on your work today and as you go forward and your collaborations to help us generate some of those wonderful ideas and momentum for them, because your asking these questions so directly can infuse into the national conversation, into the associations that you participate in, and can ripple across the country. We need help in designing a constructive rating system that does good, to spur and share innovation, and to lift the burden of student debt and help us understand how we can do that. Other industries have adapted, from the American car industry to graphic designers, and it's time now for lawyers and higher education, two of the most traditional fields, to do so as well. So I challenge everyone who's interested in opportunity and affordability and value in higher education to be as rigorous and devoted, as creative and intense as we expect our students and faculty to be, as we expect our chemists and our dancers and our economics students to be in their work. This vital work of education and opportunity and democracy demands that all of us, education, business, federal and state government, philanthropy, join together in the interests of our students and our nation. Thank you very much. Yep, you tell me. Okay. Michael tells me that we have time for some questions, and I'd be happy to take questions. Did you say till past? Great. Okay.
Hi, Jamie.
Hi, Walt.
I'm Walt Harrison from the University of Hartford. We've known each other for a long time. I'm delighted that somebody with your background has been asked to lead this very complex and difficult challenge. I think you laid it out very well. My question is this. It seems to me one of the great challenges here, the goals are admirable, the great challenge is how do you take a landscape that is as complex as higher education is, with so many diverse missions of institutions, and design a simple, understandable rating system? That's my question.
That is a perfect question. We are talking about it this way, that we want to make apples to apples comparisons. We understand that we have an enormous variety of missions, and that flows into different financial pictures, and sometimes students are comparing within one bushel of apples, and sometimes they're comparing across multiple bushels to decide where the best fit for them is. We We'll ask ourselves whether any existing clusters would be the right way to do this. The Carnegie classifications are in flux themselves. They're struggling with those. What do they have to tell us about what kind of bushels and where are they failing, and is that not a good model? There are other ways to cluster it. That is one of the most important questions that we would like people to help us understand. A personal fantasy I have is that we might ultimately be able to build it so that the ratings sort of primary site is in bushels that make sense, but that then people can pull schools to create their own cluster and look at value in very different kinds of programs. So as people say, I could get that program, I could start that program at a community college, and these are very common examples. I could start at a community college and then transfer. I could work part-time if I went to school in this location, but not so effectively at this other location, so that they can individualize it for themselves and can understand the package of cost and what they will learn and be able to do afterward. Having added the learn into that, I should drop a footnote. We do not expect that we will be able, at least in the first round of this rating system, to incorporate direct student learning results. If anybody knows of a universal measure of student learning, let me know afterward, but I don't think I'm going to be bombarded with that in a quantifiable way. What we hope is that the rating system, which will capture value, access, and outcomes in these kind of surrogate measures of loan repayment and employment, can work side by side with other measures that you develop and help people understand that more effectively target what people will learn and be able to do, what graduates go on to do, what kind of civic measures and community service activities you want to be able to showcase as the outcomes, so that they are companion pieces. I'll just go back to the apples to apples. I've also suggested a caveat that we not try and do this as Macintosh to Macintosh or Honeycrisp to Honeycrisp, or in New York it was Northern Spies to Northern Spies. Not at a level that is so micro that you are forced into a tiny peer group and can't look at, and don't get help looking at institutions across a kind of natural comparison group. But once again, you've put your finger on it, Walt, and we will be working on that and trying out different models that we hope we can share with you.
Good morning. My name's Beth Bime from Connecticut. And thank you. I appreciate what you're doing, and I think it's important. I guess I have some concerns that I think are going to be complicated for y'all to take into account, but that are really important. For example, when you look at earnings, say schools that graduate engineers, or schools may be encouraged to graduate engineers, which we're doing in Connecticut as a policymaker. That's something we're doing. But I'm an early childhood educator, lowest paid profession in the country, most important work, or some of the most important work. It's all important. How do we encourage colleges to graduate early childhood educators if they're going to have really low income when they graduate? And I guess I know it's complicated, but how do you respond to those sorts of concerns?
We are looking at ways to understand employment or ability to repay loans or sustain a set of personal choices and a household, sustain the individual, that, exactly as you say, do not make negatives of the very things we're doing with the other hand. Early childhood education is a huge priority for the department and the nation at the very same time. Teaching, I've spent years working on legal public interest initiatives in a field that has some very high paid jobs and but values that kind of work as well. One thought we have is, and this is also all in the analytic stage, are there ways that we can have a pass-fail measure, not reward in value high dollar versus low dollar work, but working or earning in some general way that says it's fine, and we don't care whether it's a Wall Street venture capitalist or a Wall Street or venture capitalist or early childhood, as long as it's above something. Another suggestion we've had, and these are just sharing with you some of the internal discussions, would it be better to measure unemployment than income, because that might help us look at the real problem area as opposed to distinctions among worthy pursuits. As a school with a lot of arts and theater graduates who were among our, the people we talked about when we said, what have you accomplished? I'm very sensitive to that.
Thank you.
So some of you may have ways that we can answer those questions. That's part of why we're going to experts in how do we get the right metrics and not just the obvious ones to do exactly what you're asking. Hi, Karen.
Hi, Karen Gross. Let me ask you to focus on a different issue related to student indebtedness and focus on the possibility of legislation, albeit difficult to get anything through Congress, on the possibility of discharge of student indebtedness in bankruptcy, both public and private, and rethinking the conditions under which one could have such discharge that may be a kind of short-term solution to start to level the playing field as we make some of these other changes.
An important and recurring issue. You're right that our focus for many of our ideas is what can the administration accomplish without new legislation. The citations, I think, are in the newspaper for the last month or so. And that is one related activity. The whole set of that third leg of the president's three-legged stool about innovation, ratings, and student debt have people thinking about very imaginative ways. That's one very practical one in terms of dischargeability. But how should we be asking students to repay, and are there better ways to, including a pay-as-you-learn method, to limit repayment so that students who are in the kinds of positions that you're describing, worthy, responsible, but not sufficient to repay their loans, might allow them to go to school, get educations that have value for them, but not worry about the debt responsibility in ways that deter them from pursuing post-secondary education. So that's one of many ideas that we're thinking about. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. I will make sure that the staff here knows how to reach me, and I look forward to a continuation of this conversation among you and with you as we go forward. Thank you very much.